Welcome to the Women and Wealth podcast with Esther Szabo. Esther is a respected leader in the field of personal financial advice with over 25 years of experience. After going through her own significant and challenging life-changing events, she overcame fear and self-doubt to launch her own successful advisory firm. Now Esther is ready to share her practical and personal experiences to help other women clear their hurdles and brave life's transitions. In this way, she inspires women to lead fulfilling and confident lives.
Hello and welcome to the Women and Wealth podcast with Esther Szabo from Gates Past Advisor. Today, I'm excited because we gave you a teaser last time, but Esther's going to be talking to us about termites and financial termites specifically. Good morning, Esther. How are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. Good morning to you too.
Thanks. Termites, they're disgusting, destructive, and a huge problem. So I'm assuming that financial termites are about the same thing.
Yeah, very similar. Some of the similarities are that you don't necessarily see all the destruction going on. When you look at your house, you don't see those little bugs chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing away.
Yeah.
You may see their residue, but it's really easy to miss. And that's why I liken that to financial issues that are not necessarily obvious when we're walking around or looking at our bank accounts or just navigating through our life. But they are certainly there. They can be there.
Yeah, that's a little scary. I mean, because that's out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. You just don't think about what's inside that wall or what's inside that account sometimes, I guess, and it can sneak up on you.
Yes, they can. Those things can gnaw away at one's financial foundation.
So what are the financial termites? Give us some examples.
Well, I'll give you some examples. There are so many we wouldn't have time, but one that is, I'll just start off with one of the ones that's the most difficult that I have seen over and over is the parents giving away too much money to their adult children prematurely, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I hate to even go from talking about termites to equating people's children as a termite, but this is what I see. Prospects or clients, they come to me and they say, we want to have a firm financial foundation as we retire. Or certainly a woman comes through in terms of in transition and says that. And then I'm looking and their expenses may not be out of line at all. They're living pretty moderately. Mm-hmm. Yet there is this big expense or larger expense that comes up regularly. And it's not unusual here. I live in Northern California in Silicon Valley. And housing is very expensive. It's very hard to get by on one income if it's a married couple with kids, certainly one income if it's a single person. And many parents here who grew up in a different environment in the Bay Area where it just was not as expensive, and certainly they want their children around them. They don't want them to move away into a less expensive environment. So they're helping them. And I show them it's not sustainable. It's a difficult issue. I'm not here to say, well, all you need to do is make your balance sheet work by just not sending that check anymore. Good, we're done. Mm-hmm. And that's just not how life is. It's not how family relationships are. But it certainly is something that can undermine that foundation.
So how's that conversation had when it's already in play?
It's a very straightforward conversation. It's a kind conversation, but straightforward. This is what I figured that clients are paying me to do. Tell them the truth. Don't sugarcoat it, and let them and us collaboratively decide on what strategies we need to put in place. One client, actually, they were married when they came to me, and then her husband passed away, but they were long-term clients who this was an issue for 2 of their 3 children. They just were helping them along, and each time it really impacted. They would tell me, this is where we want to retire. This is where we want to live. And there just wouldn't be enough money to fund that home purchase and continue this type of spending. We talked about it. We talked about what the impacts were and made adjustments to the plan and changed what type of living situation that they would have because they didn't think they would change their gifting habit because they didn't see their children's situation changing. That's fine. It's not up to me I'm not the judge and jury and executioner. It's putting it out there on the table to say, what do we need to do? In other situations, I've had family meetings where the whole family of children come together in another case, it was with the widow, the mom, and we all talked about what we saw because we each see financial situations from our own perspective. Again, I'm hired because people come to me and say, I want to be financially secure. So I see and advise from that perspective. The client sees it, in this case, from her perspective. I see these children struggling and it's really hard to live with. And then the children can share from their perspective. And in this particular case, it was, Mom, we appreciate this, but it would worry us more if you weren't okay. We will be okay. We appreciate that you're willing, and we love that. And we will not be comfortable if you overextend as a result. So getting it all out gave more permission to, in this case, the widow, to just keep focusing on keeping her boat afloat rather than keeping afloat 5 other households, which is just too much for anybody.
Absolutely. And I don't know any parent that doesn't want to give good gifts to their children and help them out as much as they can. And I can imagine that may kind of have she would have a feeling of failure, not being able to do that, not being able to continue that, and not knowing how to then broach that subject with her own children to say, I don't know if I can do this anymore, because kind of maybe some guilt involved, maybe some, she might feel ashamed. That would be very difficult. And I think that from the kids' perspective, they may have no clue that mom's struggling with this issue internally because she hasn't said anything out loud. Do you find that a lot within families?
Yeah. I mean, what families do sit down and talk about finances?
Yeah.
Generation, it's well, not just for a certain generation, but in this case, the generation, the Depression era, in this case, it's a very embarrassing topic. Just like you said, they don't want to say we can't do it. They may have been helped by their own parents. That's not unusual. But the expenses now are so much higher. So much more is needed that it really can't be compared apples to apples. You're correct, though. Most families who talks about this, or when we do try and talk about it, I know in my own family, bringing it up with my mom, she instantly tried to rush to a different topic. Didn't want to talk about it. We got to go to something else. How this was starting, 20 years ago, knowing that my mom was not financially in a position that she would be prepared for retirement. But she had that embarrassment and that shame that she and my father hadn't done better. So, and in that case, it just required being humorous, being light, and being persistent gently.
Yeah, I think that lack of communication is one of the major termites, in my opinion, because it's over time. If they keep deferring and not wanting to talk about it and not bringing up the topic, it could be 6 months, a year, 2, 3 years later when it becomes vitally important or it becomes too late.
Correct. And if only it was only 6 months or 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
You named 2 termites right there. One is the lack of communication, whether it's within families or just husband and wife to wife, husband to husband, not talking about where are we going? What is the financial direction? That's hard for any married or bonded couple to talk about. We're all very busy. We all have a lot of competing priorities. Most people are even just sleep deprived, just getting enough rest, exercise, and good food, and being present in a pleasant way with our families. That's a full boat right there. And you add on what stresses are going on at work, what's going on with school, and then you try and talk about the future. There's just not enough time often. And if things are basically going okay now, why do we want to talk about it anyway? Let's just focus on keeping things being pleasant now rather than potentially bringing up a stressful topic or a topic that we don't have the answers to. And that too is a termite of just not knowing necessarily where each spouse is landing. Or even if we know where each one is landing, we know what our thoughts or concerns are, not moving forward to tie up the question marks around the future, to engage additional help. That can lead to the third one that you mentioned, which is procrastinating the planning, the discussion, the meetings, and it can go on for years.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, that's kind of the attitude a lot of times, I would assume.
it is. And our brains are not necessarily wired to think out what will our lives be like in 20 years. We're more wired still to think about the current threats, keeping ourselves clear of the current threats so that our main levels of security are not messed with. And thinking that far out ahead is very challenging for how our brains are wired up. Another termite is looking at, and nobody likes to do this, but not checking in terms of our current spending or our planned future spending to see if it's really in alignment with how will we manage these expenses when there is no income coming in, or if the income is just Social Security in retirement, or if one is fortunate to have a pension, and then living off the investments that we have. This is, I have a financial planner, as I've shared with you. Mm-hmm. When I originally engaged her for this, it was when I was planning on launching this practice. And as I've shared before, David had passed away the year before, and I was in a very different environment, dealing with the inheritance from his mom, who had passed away 5 weeks before that, navigating what we had built together, and then addressing career. And I wasn't sure if the business would go. I thought it would be okay. A number of the clients were coming along. And I mean, all the clients came with me, and a number of them I'd worked with for years and years. But who knows? So I said, I was how old when I started this business? I was 50. And I said, well, let's see if I can retire at 60, just in case things don't work out. Mm-hmm. I don't personally have a goal to retire at 60, but I want to know if it's possible. That's not unusual for clients also coming in. They want to know what is possible for them. And so I have been working with my financial planner with that goal, so to speak. How does it look for me if I retire at 60? And I recently saw her, and she told me, oh, you are not going to be able to retire at 60 if you are spending the way that you are spending now. Mm-hmm. And what I spend on is a lot of personal development, different resources for honestly good emotional and physical and mental health. That is so important to me. And so I pay for body work and different courses and workshops, and as we were speaking about earlier, things, even fun things like concerts and all of that. Mm-hmm. And for me, hearing that was okay, because I have then the choice to say, that's okay. It's more important to me that I keep spending on those things than it is to retire at 60.
Absolutely.
That's an emergency goal. That's not a real goal.
Yeah, and what's possible isn't always what you want, right? I mean, it's nice to know what's possible, but even if she said, you could actually retire next year. Well, you're not ready. You have clients that you love to take care of and you love to work with, and you still have so much you want to accomplish. It's just nice to know what is possible. And then from there, I think it's easier to make a better plan for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
That's correct. And just have that perspective. I do like to work with my planner because I want to know what it's like on the client side. I agree. It's a pain. They ask you for all these statements and information and documentation, and I'm pretty good with all that data, yet my life is busy too. And I go, oh, God, I have to get that. So at least from that perspective, let alone what is it like to be in the receiver's seat? Also on the same topic about not confirming if spending, how will it be for me when I don't have an income? Dan Ariely is a professor of psychology at Duke University and a behavioral economist, and he had a great article in the Wall Street Journal last week, which was September 3rd. And he talked about this rule of thumb. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's very common that, quote unquote, in retirement, you will spend about 70% of what you spend when you're working. And I have never seen that. I've been doing plans, working with clients for over 25 years. I have never, ever seen that bear out. Mm-hmm. And it's for the reasons he mentions. One of the benefits of working is you are distracted from looking at all the things you can buy.
Good point.
Sometimes I'm not a big mall shopping person, but sometimes I go to the mall like at Christmas and I'm like, wow, there's a lot of things you can buy out here. I have no idea. I spend some time on online shopping, but not a lot. And this is what he says too. When people stop working, there is all this time to think about other experiences and classes and travel and just things. And it's not necessarily just things for ourselves. It could be things for our children, again, our grandchildren. We go, oh, we'd love to have that experience with them, or take them here, or take them there. So it's also not to be assumed that I don't like that rule of thumb at all. And that termite of not really thinking through what we'll be spending in retirement causes people to be on a false assumption for too long.
Yep, and that confirms a conspiracy theory I've had for a long time. The whole mall walkers. I think that organization was started by the mall to get seniors that are retired to walk through their mall for hours a day just to find stuff to buy. I'm telling you, I'm onto something. I'm onto something. I'm going to do a little bit of research on that.
Okay, you go for
or
that.
maybe not. Maybe not.
That'll be your book and podcast.
Oh, thank you. That's the book I want to publish right there. The mall walker conspiracy. Yeah, that'll be a bestseller, I'm sure. All right, what's another termite?
Well, still, it is that procrastination. I think if I hear one thing most frequently from prospective clients that turn into clients, that turn into ongoing clients, is I wish I had done this sooner. Mm-hmm. We will never get back lost time. And the more that we're aware, the more that we have chances and opportunities to make decisions about our behavior. This holds true for things, obviously, financial strategy, financial planning, but things like even home maintenance. How many times I sit down with clients and say, okay, they go, this is how I am, this is when I want to retire, et cetera. Okay, the two things I always ask, is there anything you need to do for your home? How is that roof? What about your heating and air conditioning? Mm-hmm. What about your furnace? Those types of things. And I would say 60% of the time there are things that need to be done, that need to be addressed, and making sure that gets built in, because homes do not get better with age.
Absolutely.
They need to be maintained and taken care of.
Yeah, that'd be nice if they did, but it's not my experience, Esther, really.
They're not fine wine or cheese or anything like that. Things wear out. You compare that with living longer, mm-hmm. and the need to be comfortable in one's home during work life as well as after. And that procrastination can lead to higher expenses. The other can be things that are not fun for anyone, looking at long-term care insurance. Mm. That's an area, we'll do a separate podcast on that. That's an area that
Definitely
carries a lot of emotion with it.
And a lot of misconceptions, I think, too.
Like such as?
With long-term care, somebody's going to try to sell me a policy that I really don't need it. How am I going to need it? Is this just something I'm going to waste my money on again?
Right.
And I don't think people understand how it's changed in the last 30 to 40 years, and how important it is and how expensive it is.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree. There's a lot of not good press out about long-term care insurance, and I appreciate that. I think it's changed even in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, because the assumptions that they originally built the policies on are not accurate. They were borne out as not accurate.
Yep.
And so it's looking at what if one needs that care. And unfortunately, the policies get more expensive as we age, mm-hmm. because the likelihood of needing it comes closer. So looking at things like that and saying, how will I take care of more expensive needs for health in my future? Who wants to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, we do. We want to talk about that on another podcast for sure.
That's true. I do.
Yep.
I will ask my clients. I will bring these things up. But independent of working with an advisor, again, a couple on a weekend in their 50s, let's sit down and talk about ongoing healthcare expense.
Let's talk about my declining health. We haven't talked about that since yesterday, so absolutely.
Talk about dementia. It's very difficult. And the other being the same is along those same lines is estate planning. Mm. So estate planning is one of those other areas that can really be easy to procrastinate. Mm-hmm. It is not fun to spend money on this whole document that takes serious decision-making and discussion, and there isn't necessarily always a perfect answer about how to allocate assets after one has passed away. And many people say, well, I'll be dead. What will it matter?
I don't have to deal with it.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
So one of the things I am familiar with, there's a couple examples. We've heard lately about Prince died, mm-hmm. Aretha Franklin died, both leaving no will and they have children, they have family members, and I can only imagine what discussions are going on about who has access to the music, what music should be released, obviously the money and the dollars, and what if I don't
property
know.
And there's all sorts of complexity there. But I imagine there's still a ton of complexity in just a family that's not necessarily a major singer or a superstar like that. There's got to be all sorts of things with the state and then federal, and I can imagine.
And just making decisions. I've lost several clients this past year. People do get old and they do pass away. Or they have an illness that was unanticipated and they sadly do pass away. And having the estate plans in place, especially when the survivor is and are adult children, makes it so much easier. We can sit down with those children and say, this is what the plan says. This is what we'll be doing. We obviously sit down with the estate attorney. We make sure, because we have been through this, what are the steps that need to happen next? Making sure the taxes, there's a reserve for taxes, and that the whole administration of the estate happens well. But even before that, we make sure with the clients that their estate plan is in order, that it's the way they want. One of the most challenging things about estate planning is we may be sitting here in 2018 and think, okay, this is how I want my assets divided when I pass away. And then all of a sudden it could be 2028. And things have changed in terms of relationship, in terms of who we want to be in charge when we pass away, what's going on with the children, what we may have gifted to one child to help them with their life versus another. So the estate plan needs to be reviewed and reworked possibly more than one time. That's good and bad news. The good news apart that is, one doesn't have to agonize over getting it perfect the first time. If it's close enough, that's good. And the bad news is one may need to revisit it and tweak and change. It's not just set it and forget it.
Yeah, there'd be two reasons I'd want to take care of an estate plan. Number one, I wouldn't want to put my children through not having one and having them deal with it and all the drama that could come from it. And then secondly, my selfish reason is I worked hard all my life. I want
right.
my money to go where I want it to go, and I want it to touch lives where I want it to touch lives. I don't want it to be up to the state or up to anybody else, what happens to the future I've built for my family.
Yeah, you do want to be the engaged person. And the other things with estate plan, obviously we're talking about a document here, a will or a trust. I have seen it where one's IRAs, they are part of one's estate plan. One's 401k is part of one's estate plan. They don't get put under a trust. They have their own estate plan because why? We name beneficiaries of those assets.
Gotcha.
I have a widow right now who, she and her husband, they were always busy and they never got to updating their IRA beneficiaries, and he passed away, and there's challenges with her receiving certain assets because the beneficiaries weren't updated. And it not only requires an issue in terms of she will be okay if she doesn't receive those assets financially, even more than that. For others, they might not be okay. So they'd better find out now and make sure it's current. On the other hand, though, what it is, it's creating a lot of paperwork, headache, time, money, none of which she has in great supply to allocate to this particular resolution. So the management of one's estate plan really needs to not be procrastinated, even though it is not fun. And these are things that can be a termite because it's not obvious. You can walk around all day. Who knows if you've got an correct and current estate plan. But the issues that can come to bear when not really will unmask that very, very wobbly foundation.
Got it. I know you have some more termites to talk about. Can we do a part 2 podcast?
I think we need to do a part 2 and maybe a 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, gee, that's a lot of bugs. I don't like that. All right. Well, thank you, Esther, for your time today, and I appreciate all the information you've brought us, and I love this discussion. So let's continue to part 2 for sure.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it, Eric.
All right. And to everybody listening, thank you so much for attending today's podcast with Esther Szabo from Gates Pass Advisors. I appreciate her time, and I hope you do too. If you have questions about anything she spoke about today, please reach out to her, call her. More importantly, I would love for you to subscribe to this podcast if you have not done so. click the subscribe now button below. That way, when Esther comes out with the next one, part 2, it'll automatically show up on your listening device, and it makes it really easy to share with family and friends. So for everyone at Gates Past Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Women and Wealth podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you receive notifications of new podcasts as they become available. Check out the website at www.gatespassadvisors.com for more information. This content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions expressed and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security.